Yep, nope, you're fine. So this is a fun talk. It's a new talk. I usually talk about genetics or survivorship, but this really is kind of the journey we take in our own career development. You know, how we become the person we want to be, how we reinvent ourselves at different kind of time points in our career. And I thought it'd be fun to take it from not such a serious tone, but lessons learned from Dr. Seuss. So I do have a lot of disclosures. You can read them. But my biggest disclaimer is these are my own opinions. You may disagree. These are experiences. I've been in oncology for 26 and a half years. And so I'm also not related to anyone associated with Dr. Seuss. Okay, so this I thought was a great place to start. Oh, the places you'll go. So think about your aspirations when you're young. My mom kept something that I made when I was like 6, and I was going to be by age 25 a teacher with 3 kids, all this type of thing, right? So you're full of promise. You want to go to college, you want to go to nursing school, you want to become a physician, you want to become a psychologist. You know, whatever that journey is, you have your aspirations. Then you find this great life partner. It's super. You have some kids if you want kids or not, and that's okay too. And you know, your work will be fairly rewarded, and you can absolutely do it all. So, oh, the places you actually go. So where do we go? Well, there's twists and turns across this journey. We know that school and training is not a one-way street, and sometimes you take detours. And I use lots of car analogies, even when I talk to patients about things. So we are on a multi-lane mega highway, and sometimes we merge, sometimes we, yield, sometimes we have to get off at an off-ramp, and we have to be able to flex, and we have to be able to pivot without beating ourselves up and really kind of feeling like we let ourselves down, we let our parents down, all those kind of things that we put as pressures for ourselves. Now, how many times has your heart been broken? So I can count probably on both hands. So it's important to think, you may have met that guy in high school or that gal in high school. You may not have met him yet, and that's okay. But that's kind of part of our journey. You may have had kids, you may not, and there's pros and cons. Kids are great. I have nieces and nephews. So I live vicariously through others, and I feel I'm an excellent aunt, and that is my role. But I always thought, based on that picture when I was 6, I was going to have 3 kids. So there's not a clear road to promotion. You have to think about what you want to do, what you're willing to give up at the time, and what types of sacrifices you're willing to make, and when you flex and when you don't. So you can't do it all. And that's the moral of the story, but that's okay. And so maybe your road is a little slower. Maybe, you kind of slow it down. So you have to really think about what you do, when you do it, and how are you going to go through that journey. So the next few slides is I want to give you a little background on how we actually got to this place of these overachiever women, right? So everyone in here is an overachiever. I know most of you. I know how you're hardwired. We're all a little bit the same. But it's a generational effect. And how many of you had moms who were like, you're going to be successful and you're going to go to college? And there was a lot of drive, partially because a lot of those moms didn't have those opportunities. So they wanted something better for us, or maybe it was your grandmother or an aunt or even your father. So the hardest part is that when you have this drive, you also have to look at the fact that it wasn't until 1974 that a woman could actually get a credit card without having her husband sign as a, 1974. Seriously? And this isn't man bashing, this is just reality. And then the second part is that if you can't get a credit card, you can't build credit. So you couldn't go out and buy a house because you had no credit. So these are just things that I think are fascinating because it's actually not that long ago. So we have these expanded opportunities. We have opportunities for education, for career development, but sometimes I think we also have unrealistic expectations. So how do you right-size that? How do you check and balance that? And I often look to 2 of my mentors who are both in medicine. One was actually a pulmonologist and one's an oncologist. Those 2 women were 2 of 3 women in their medical school class, and they worked really hard. They reported nothing, and they had to do whatever was necessary to sort of get the job done. So you look at how it used to be, how things get better, but then we're kind of going through this flux right now to figure out, okay, well, all these things are kind of in front of me. How do I sort them out? How do I figure out my next steps? And how do you really juggle all those expectations and recalibrate as needed? So I think we have a lot of challenges to this. There's a ton on equity. We know there's a lot of women in medicine sort of discussions happening. And I think it's important because as we think about who we are and where we strive to be, we know there's things that impact us. So I wanted to give you kind of a little history again on this. So 25 years ago, and this is a medical school example, 40% of individuals in medical school were women. As of last year, over 50%. It's actually bypassed the number of men. The interesting thing about job opportunities, if you look at hospital CEOs, about 18% are women. If you look at chairs and people in academic medicine, about 16% are women. So the hard part about that is the mission of the organization, the resource allocation, everything that's sort of the power player piece of a organization is then not controlled by a woman in that leadership role. So I think these are also interesting statistics because these are current statistics. So we have some opportunities if that's what you strive to be. The other piece is how do you think about promotion? And promotion in academic medicine is maybe an academic sort of role as an assistant professor to associate professor to a full professor. Maybe you want to be tenured. Maybe you are a nurse coordinator and you want to be a nurse manager. Maybe you want to go back and get your DNP, or you want to get your MBA or your master's in public health. So there's a lot of opportunities in front of us, but what's going to help us achieve our goal? And a lot of that we need to look out through mentorship. And how easy is it to find a mentor today? It's not easy because people are super busy, and it's not like it used to be where you could just kind of find a person, they'd sort of take you under their wing, and you would kind of go through life and experience what they experienced, which would help guide your path. So it is very difficult to find mentorship. But I also think it's important to find mentorship outside of your discipline. So for the early parts of my career, my mentors were all in medicine. But more recently, one of my best and most favorite mentors was a founding partner of Fleischman Hillard, which is a big communications and PR firm. I also have a lawyer who is a mentor. So I think you need to really think about what is missing in your kind of scope of practice and find that type of mentorship, because that really can make you a little more full circle and help you towards those goals. So I thought this was a very poignant quote. You will come to a place where the streets are not marked, right? The windows are not lighted. Anyway, the moral of this story is there is no roadmap. There is no direction for you to travel. You have to take those steps, and you have to figure out how you can be supported in those decisions, and really kind of what are your next steps. So what are these skills of a successful leader or a person that you want to be as part of your scope of practice? So maybe you don't want to be a manager or a CEO, but you still want to be the ultimate at your scope of practice. So I love this because, the meetings you'll go to, and especially during COVID, I mean, really, one more Zoom meeting, and now nobody's even on the screen because everybody's so tired of being on Zoom. So we do need to be persuasive. And it's interesting. I had a failed startup. At about 8 years ago, I started this startup, which was an online learning company. And you learn the most from your failures. But the one thing I will tell you is I did 78 pitches in 3 months. The first thing you do is you get really good at communicating your message. You need to be confident. You need to really be able to articulate what it is you're trying to accomplish. You need to have a whole lot of motivation because you're going to keep getting knocked down. You're going to hit those bumps in the road. And how do you kind of get back up and say, all right, we're going to hit reset? And I love the analogy of weight control since we talked about that. Maybe today's a bad day. Maybe you're going to enjoy those Anador's chocolates, whatever it is. But tomorrow, you just hit reset, and then you move down the road. We can't get stuck. We can't beat ourselves up. We do need to learn from those challenges, but we can't get stuck. We need to know the art of negotiation. So at COVID, as COVID hit, some of us aren't really good at asking for raises. How many of you are good at asking for a raise? It's awkward. We like almost devalue ourselves, and we're like, ooh, that really sounds kind of, can I ask for that? But the moral of the story is when I went to some of our leadership, some of which were men, it was an interesting response I got was, wow, I've never actually had to ask for a raise. And that was shocking because unfortunately, we have to advocate for ourselves. And so part of that persuasion is I always take like a sheet with bullets. I always give a one-pager. Everybody, no more than one page or one slide. And so you really need to write down, what are those attributes you bring to the table? What are the things that you've accomplished or kind of those high level? And then where do you want to go? What are those next steps? So if you think that through, if you guide that thought process, I think it does help us not only sort of reassess our own value, but then where do we want to go and how do we want to kind of ask for those things that sometimes we sort of devalue, which is really disappointing because, I do it myself. And so we really have to work hard at being uncomfortable, being vulnerable so that we can take those next steps. Networking is huge. I was so pleased to see so many people last night. We were really joyous about everybody getting together and connecting because networking, you accomplish so much more, number one, in person. We are so much more effective. But number two, we really need to use each other as support. And you feel it here today. I feel like we have a lot of support, women building women, but it's really important to think about how you use your connections or how you use the connection of your connection so that you can really accomplish those goals. And then the hardest thing for me is staying focused because I am super ADD. I didn't think I was, but I actually am. And it's important that at least if you have this big vision, you have to be able to take a stepwise process to get to whatever's the actual realistic vision, right? You can't just have, pie in the sky and not really have a good game plan to get there. So leadership entails quite a bit, and I think the interesting part about leadership is that it does require you to take risks. You do actually have to kind of put yourself out there. Sometimes you have to be vulnerable, but it's going to also lead to some failures or some disappointments. And once again, that's okay, but you have to be able to be comfortable with that. The key, which I have so learned during Zoom also, is how many people are good at listening and how many people are not good at listening. So you can't just talk, you actually have to listen. Sometimes using the old school skills like reflective listening. So you reflect back what you heard. You really have to be a good listener. We have to think about recruiting people that are the right people that aren't necessarily maybe the right on paper. And so I've always believed that you hire the right person, and then if it's the right person, you can train them to do whatever that role is and support them in achieving that. You always have to be on the lookout for opportunities. You have to flush stuff out. It's random when you meet someone on a plane or you meet someone at a meeting and all of a sudden you have this great brainstorm, you have this next step. So don't ever think that an opportunity is just going to come and present itself because it usually doesn't. You also have to be good at making hard decisions. And I think as we think about our evolving role, hard decisions are time and time again, not only in patient care, but then also in your own career development. So this position of privilege that people have in healthcare really is a big responsibility because you're not just taking care of patients, you're also taking care of yourself, you're taking care of your community, and so forth. So really important to think about how we make our decisions, how thoughtful we need to be with those decisions, and the real impact of those decisions. The other piece is, I feel, of course, you have to be enthusiastic. Enthusiasm kind of is contagious. It brings other people to the table, and enthusiasm also lets people know that you actually are behind it. You're 110% behind that. It also helps us establish trust because these are things we're passionate about. We do need to be compassionate and we need to be empathetic. How many times have you been in a situation and you get fired up about something and you realize, wow, that came off the wrong way, and you need to sort of recoil and sort of reset that. vulnerability is important, and then we have to motivate the creative process. Everything doesn't have to be A to B to C to D. Sometimes it's going to be a little outside the box, or we need to think about creative ways to accomplish a goal. And these are all parts of us in our kind of exploration, but also important because if we do the status quo, things don't ever change. So we have to kind of challenge that, and we have to be and pull out those creative juices. So there's some key components in medicine. As I said, this is a place of privilege in that we are absolutely making high impact decisions that need to be equitable, that really need to be well thought, that need to be evidence-based. So it's environments like this where we're learning and we're challenging ourselves, and we're hopefully taking back those perils and making sure that we're providing those to our patients, to our colleagues, and to our organizations. As you think about anything in medicine, once again, not status quo. And one of our worst trigger words, if I say the word like quality improvement, you're like, oh no, quality improvement. But you never get better without doing a little quality improvement. So how do you couch that? And my biggest example, once again, I don't have kids, but you have to hide the vegetables in the chicken nuggets. So I don't care how you do it or what you want to accomplish. If you make it so it's palatable, or if you sort of redirect it that maybe it's your idea, but maybe you took that idea and now it becomes your idea, it doesn't matter if we're accomplishing the goal. So these are really hard things to sort of take because we're having to be creative even in sort of consensus building and really building that trust with our partners and our peers. So implementing change, constantly thinking about how we could do something better, leaner, more efficient is very important. You have to invest in the future because, frankly, every single one of us is replaceable. And if you don't think that you're replaceable, leave and you will see you are replaceable. It may take 2 people to replace you or 3 people, but it is true. So we have to be self-aware. We have to figure out what are those things that we do bring to the table that are value add, and really think about how are we investing in our future. Because if we stay stagnant and maybe you're terrified of new technology or whatever, we've heard all about bots today. I'm telling you what, you better have a bot. So these are the things that you need to not be afraid of. So we have to focus not only on innovating the world around us, but we have to adjust to that innovation as well. And then you have to focus on research. We are all creatures of learning in oncology. That is who we are. That is probably why we are all sort of drawn to oncology, is we're lifelong learners. And that means we have to engage in research, whether it's active research, maybe we're a research participant. So these are the important pieces that really make us unique in medicine, not only as a member of medicine, but then as we become leaders in medicine. The other key component is really integrity. And this is what you got. This is who you are. And sometimes this is really hard because if you are yourself or you're advocating for your patients or your colleagues or your something that you're passionate about, it really can become a little bit vulnerable because you're putting yourself out there, you're really challenging kind of those around you, and integrity is truly all you have. But sometimes you may feel devalued, or sometimes you may feel like people are not understanding what your goal is. And so we do have to continue sort of challenging that because your integrity truly, once again, is sort of all you have. But the other piece is it is hard to stand up for what's right. And I think as we think about our own trajectory and how we advocate for your children or your loved ones, sometimes we're better at doing that for other people than we are for ourselves. So it's really important to use some of those skills and tactics and bring those into our own everyday and how we view self. There's lots of distractions, lots, right? Unnecessary drama. There's a lot of back channeling, all these things, passive aggressive people, you name it. They're all out there. But this is the world we live in. We don't have every, person that's in our sphere. They're not all going to fall into place and really be that good team player. And people are all jockeying for their own agendas as well. So part of the key is knowing your players. And it's interesting because because I do come from a background in psychology, which I'm not a practicing psychologist, but I do find it very helpful. So when I can conceptualize a person, it really helps me interact with that person. I don't have false expectations about them then, and I really do try to, incorporate what we each bring to the table, but we can't have these false expectations because otherwise we're just going to let ourselves down and we're going to let other people down. We also have way too big of scopes. Maybe some of you don't, but most of us do. And that's really where building your team and having those people kind of check you and right-size you is very important, because you may want to get all the way to the finish line, but it may take a lot longer than you thought, or there's a lot more hurdles. So how do you really control your scope and reassess your scope? And then just say no, right? So we'll take the 80s slogan, but how good are any of us at just saying no? Is anyone great at it? Some people maybe. I am not good at it. Most of the people I know are not good at it. So how do we control our environment? By realizing we have to prioritize our time. That's a very important piece. We need to be present in our daily lives with the people we love and the people we care about, and we can't always be distracted by this other stuff. So it's really a fine line. There's not a good way to say no. There's not sometimes a good way for us to prioritize. And when you're early in your career and you're younger, you kind of don't say no, because you need to build that momentum and that stamina. As you get a little older, you're like, do I really need to do that? So the key is you can also delegate. So if you've built a sphere, you need to be able to say, this would be a really great opportunity for you to do, and I think that's important. I don't feel like I say no to many things, but I'm not always the one doing them now. And I think it's important to start triaging who would be best for that role. Maybe it's a committee, maybe it is an opportunity to be part of a conference, whatever it is. You really have to think about those priorities and what's mission-centric to you, and how do we triage that down. So kind of a good thing to think about. So there's lots of things holding us back, right? There's unconscious bias, there's the fact, and this is an interesting piece about the maternal wall. If you go to part-time, are you taking it seriously? Is it going to slow your career down? Or if you need to leave every day at 4:30 to go pick up your kids. So we have to first be okay with that ourselves, and then we have to really be able to engage in those around us. I think the other interesting thing about the maternal wall is sometimes we also have to be self-aware that it may take us 3 or 4 more years to accomplish that career goal, but at the same time you're staying present in your life with those other things that are important. So really reestablishing what those goals are. It's also very interesting that as you kind of go through your career, you see things that just don't make sense. So I was promoted to a tenured professor, 3 or 4 years ago, and what I've recently learned is that if I go anything less than 100% time, I lose my tenure. What? Why would you lose your tenure, right? But you do. And do you think it affects proportionally men and women? No, because more women go part-time. More women, and unfortunately, not only do they go part-time, but even at a full-time level, they're paid 20 to 30% less than their male colleagues doing the same exact job. So we still have a lot of work to do. And then there's the double-edged sword, and I wrote it as a double-edged sword because Me Too is a double-edged sword. The mentors we had that reported nothing, that really didn't help us at all. That put us in a place where then you report everything, that's a different sword. So how do we get to the middle? How do we kind of handle our own problems? At the same time, we're identifying bigger problems, systematic problems. So there's a balancing act. There's not a right answer, but we have to kind of work through that together. And I think that some of these things we just have to acknowledge, and we have to sort of work through and use our peer groups to figure out, how we deal with these challenges, because there really are still some significant challenges holding us back. Oops, sorry. I thought this was an interesting presentation at ASCO last year. And this was a group of physicians, men and women, almost 300. And, and 80% of physicians had some sort of, it was unwanted advances, any type of sexual harassment you could think about, whereas it was 56% of men. So these are still issues, and we have to figure out how to really balance out a lot of bad behavior. But the biggest thing, I think, is bad actors need to actually be dealt with. We don't deal with bad actors. We like promote them, or we put them somewhere else in a box. And I'm like, what? So we have to deal with bad actors. And as we, once again, kind of deal with our own struggles, I think that we need to pivot, we need to manage expectations, we need to reassess, and we need to constantly be building that circle of trust, because that's one of the only ways that we're going to be able to right-size this as we go across a journey. So there's lots of ways that we could potentially, kind of tackle this, from career flexibility to, sort of mitigation and dealing with bad actors, with paid leave. But I think one of the biggest things is us continuing to support each other is really a key element as we grow and as we advance our careers. So there is no right answer. The places you could have gone, coulda, woulda, shoulda. You can't get stuck there. This is where you pull out your inner psychology and you say, okay, well, this isn't exactly how I thought it was going to go, but that's okay. And maybe you're going to grieve that, and maybe you're going to be disappointed, but you can't get stuck in that place, because when you get stuck, it really takes you 5 steps back. So you have to very quickly pivot and be able to build your own tool chest to be able to take those steps forward and be stronger along the way. So we kind of talked about this. And so I wanted to give you guys just a few resources. If any of you listen to any Brene Brown, I find her very, uplifting and sort of prioritizing. ASCO has a great leadership program. ONS has a very nice leadership competency tool. So don't hesitate to use these tools. Reach out to folks, meet folks, and I want to thank you guys for your time, and thank you for being here today.